Hello everyone, and welcome to Talking to the Void. Today is August 26th, 2023, and if that sounds familiar, it's because my last episode was recorded on the exact same day. I'm just releasing them a little bit further apart because, I don't know how big gaps between content releases are going to be because my life has gotten busy with school and things like that, so we'll see. Anyway, today I am going to be talking about the problem with modern movies. It has come to my attention recently how a lot of movies that are being churned out nowadays kind of suck, and if my stomach growls at any point and you can hear it on the recording, I'm sorry. It does what it wants, it has things to say, and I, can't stop that. So, and now, not all of the movies and shows that I've watched recently, but nearly all of the movies that I've cared to watch recently have had something in them that just hurt my soul a little. I've been paying more attention to my complaints with these things, and I decided that this deserved its own podcast episode, so I will be discussing the main recurring issues that I see coming up in various shows and movies I've watched and in media in general, and how I think they would be best fixed. I will try to have examples that show how not to handle the problem, as well as examples that show how to solve the problem. Just taking a quick glance at my outline that I've written for myself, because this is another partly scripted, partly unscripted episode. The outline that I have does not have any examples in some cases. There are some points that are missing examples, so I'm sure there's plenty of examples that you can think of, though, to fill that space. So I will try to provide spoiler alerts and any necessary trigger warnings just before I bring them up in my examples, and I think that's all my notes for now. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing, which is arguably my biggest complaint recently, is lack of emotional investment in characters. As an audience member, that is not being emotionally invested in. Usually the biggest problem is when you're not emotionally invested in the main character, but, it's also problematic when you're not emotionally invested in any of the characters. So my example of a show with this problem, for me anyway, in my opinion, is Andor, which you would know from my podcast episode 2, where I talked about how that one was a problem for me because I didn't emotionally connect with literally any of the characters, and all of them were kind of terrible people. So yeah. An example of something where I was really emotionally invested, spoiler alert, is for Good Omens Season 1. I had an appreciation for basically every character in Season 1 of the show, even, the really minor characters that don't get much screen time. Like, for example, the delivery man. I cared about that guy. I liked him. I was invested in this man as a character and was sad when he died and happy when he came back. But obviously, of course, I am deeply emotionally invested in Crowley and Aziraphale and their relationship, particularly in Season 1, and it's just really good. I think I've said this probably a few times now. I am planning to make a podcast episode on Good Omens Season 1. It is very good. And then we love Crowley and Aziraphale, or at least I love Crowley and Aziraphale, and I'm emotionally invested in their characters because they care about each other so deeply. Characters genuinely caring about other characters makes me care about those characters sometimes, a lot of the time. Not always, as, I talked about in my Andor podcast episode as well, but most of the time, if I have characters who genuinely care about each other, then I will end up caring about them too. Crowley and Aziraphale also have quirks that we can relate to, and they feel like full, well-rounded characters, and so, that's another thing. I don't like shows and movies where the characters are just there for the sake of plot, and so they feel really two-dimensional and just, not all that exciting. But with Good Omens Season 1 and a little bit of Season 2, no spoiler alert for that yet, because I'm not going to talk about any spoilers from that, but what was my point in this? Just that I am emotionally invested in the characters and genuinely care about them, and they are not just plot devices. They advance the plot, certainly, but they are also people outside of being parts of the plot, So, anyway, First problem, lack of emotional investment in characters. Those are my two examples. I have many other examples, but I don't have space in the podcast to rant about nearly all of them, and I know that I've ranted about some of them before already. She-Hulk. So, moving on. Another issue that I have is when movies and shows don't give the audience enough information to solve a mystery for themselves. So, bad example, spoiler alert, for Good Omens Season 2. The kind of big spoiler in of the plot anyway in Season 2 is that, Gabriel shows up without any memory, and he is actually in love with Beelzebub, another angel and demon falling in love with each other. And Aziraphale's trying to figure out the mystery of how Gabriel showed up with no memory of who he was. And while there are definitely clues dropped throughout the season that on a rewatch you're like, oh, I see how that fits into the overall plot, in my opinion, there just wasn't enough information for the viewer to figure that out on their first viewing, because it's a show that I really love, so I was like, let me try to solve the mystery too. And it's just in the final episode when you get all of the information dumped that you're like, oh, so that's what happened, but there wasn't any way for you to possibly piece that together just by watching Season 2 up until the last episode. And, I think I haven't mentioned this yet. This is me writing a podcast episode that I'm thinking of. I watched Good Omens with my mom, and we really enjoyed it. And she pointed out that maybe the point of, the quote-unquote mystery in Season 2 is that maybe we were just never supposed to figure out, what happened with Gabriel. The point was that nobody could figure it out, which is how Gabriel and Beelzebub's love for each other remained hidden. So perhaps it's more of just a personal pet peeve as somebody who loves mysteries and solving puzzles and things like that. I mean, overall, Season 2 was good. That was my main complaint from Season 2, is that there wasn't enough information for the audience to solve the mystery themselves. Then, an example of something where they gave the audience plenty of information to solve the mystery for themselves, or, in my opinion anyway, was Death on the Nile, the movie that came out, was it 2021, starring Kenneth Branagh, who also directed it, and played Poirot. Gal Gadot was in that movie as well. I don't remember the names of the other actors. I think Letitia Wright was in it. Oh my goodness, who else was in that movie? A lot of other people were in that movie. But anyway, for that one, I was able to put all the clues together, and it was nice because the clues were often presented anyway, in very clever, subtle ways that the audience can catch if they're paying attention, but if they're just watching it to watch it, they won't pay it much mind and they'll probably miss it. As an example, there's a bit where this lady comments just as the people are getting off the riverboat to, I think, go look at an Egyptian tomb, ? I don't know. But she just briefly comments that her carmine paint has gone missing. In case you don't know, carmine is a shade of red that is similar to blood, and I went, oh, that's going to be used as fake blood at some point. Somebody is going to fake a death or an injury. And so then, that is in fact what happened. This guy pretended to get shot in the knee, and used red paint to make it look like he had been shot in the knee, before actually shooting himself in the knee later. It was really horrible. I'm like, why would you do that? It was messed up, but it was nice, the fact that I was able to piece the mystery together for myself. I paid attention to how characters interacted with each other and to situations, and I was like, oh, I think I know where this is going, and yeah, I did. So yeah, I actually enjoyed it for the fact that I was able to put it together. A random thing that I just want to rant about because I'm thinking about it now. One part of the movie that just slightly scarred me is some lady, I forget exactly how this happens, she gets thrown or falls overboard, and then there's this little window over by the... I'm not thinking of names of parts of ships very well right now. Because it's a riverboat, the wheel with paddles that helps propel the boat. I don't think that's called a rotor, is it? I don't know. Well, anyway, she is stuck on that wheel. She's been drowned, I think. But like, you just see the wheel turn around and you just see feet go by the window, and I don't know, that was particularly horrible to me. There's just a certain kind of horror that just stuck with me. And yeah, I think about that sometimes. Just slightly traumatized from that. But anyway, I joke. That was really off the point. But my main point in bringing up Death on the Nile is that it rewards the observant viewer. And I like when stories are written so that they reward the viewer and they don't just go, haha, you can't solve this because I'm just too smart and you don't have all the information. Like, that to me is just not fun to watch. But that really might just be me. However, that said, I do enjoy BBC Sherlock, even though it is kind of a lot of, haha, I'm smart, this is how I solved it, and you don't really get to solve it. But for me, I think the character interactions and the overall plot of that show make it so that I can forgive that point. But anyway, moving on to the next thing. Unnecessary romantic subplots. Some unnecessary romantic subplots can be good, but there are others that just feel really forced. The example that I have is something that I'm sure some of you are going to know. My bad example is, spoiler alert, from The Umbrella Academy. And the main relationship that I have an issue with is, I think her name is Agnes, the donut lady, and Hazel. Because here's the thing, watching it, okay, while I was watching it, I already knew that from the friend with whom I was watching the show, I knew from that friend that Agnes and Hazel, or, if Agnes isn't her name, the donut lady and Hazel became an item, and I was like, what? And I watched it, and I tried to pick up on the bits that were supposed to be them flirting, and it did not translate. I felt like they just didn't have any chemistry. Maybe that was supposed to be the point, but wow, did that feel like, an unnecessary romantic subplot. This same friend also had a really neat theory that I think would have been a much better plot point than, Agnes and Hazel falling in love. And that theory was that Agnes was actually Hazel's daughter, but there was a weird age difference because of timelines and stuff, and, Hazel being the time-jumping, assassin that he is. And so the idea was that he was actually just checking up on his daughter before the end of the world. And I was like, that would have been really sweet if, that had worked out. Like, he has family that he cares about, so he's checking on her. That would have been really good. But, like, as a romantic couple, Agnes and Hazel had absolutely zero chemistry, and it wasn't until they were literally kissing behind the donut shop that I went, oh, so that's where that was supposed to be going? Because otherwise, I didn't read that personally, and yeah, it was bizarre. Anyway. A sort of kind of meh example of an unnecessary-ish romantic. It's questionable whether or not it's unnecessary, but what I think is a possibly unnecessary romantic subplot is, spoiler alert, in the show Wednesday. And that one is with Wednesday and Tyler. So, I don't know. I thought their relationship was cute, but it wasn't hugely necessary, I guess. I mean, I guess the whole point was for it to build to the ending of the penultimate episode where they kiss and Wednesday finds out that Tyler is actually the monster who has been absolutely just destroying people in the woods and stuff. Like, that was a good reveal. I liked that reveal. I already suspected him from episode 3, to be honest. I didn't trust the man, but I didn't trust his character, I should say. Actor is great, didn't trust his character. And so I liked that was how they did the reveal, because the kiss triggered Wednesday's visionary powers, and that was cool. But, as a romantic couple, they were decent. But it wasn't anything like, yes, I love this. So yeah, there's that. And then, let's see, my good example of a romantic subplot, this one is not unnecessary though, so who knows if it counts or not, but a good example of a romantic subplot is with Steven and Layla in Moon Knight. So, spoilers for Moon Knight ahead. Because, Mark and Layla, and, Mark and Steven are just alters in the Moon Knight system. So Mark and Layla are married, but Mark wanted a divorce to try to protect her, and, once Layla meets Steven, and they go and try to stop Harrow from unleashing Amit on the world, they start to fall in love a little bit, and I suppose it can be kind of weird because it's different personalities in the same body who are falling in love with her, but I don't know. I personally thought it was cute and sweet, and it's like Mark and Steven get to share Layla because they're both alters. Have no idea what that would look like with Jake. Honestly, not sure. I want to know. But I don't know. I thought it was cute because there's already established chemistry there between Layla and Mark. But throwing in the addition of Steven as another personality who falls in love with Layla as well was just kind of cute, and I don't know. I really liked it. They worked really well together, had great chemistry. It was fun to watch them. And they were both their own independent people outside of the relationship. They are both able to function on their own without the other. It's not like the whole, oh no, I can't live without you sort of thing. But yeah, they're both just their own individual people first, and then they come together to make a great relationship. And I think that's how all relationships should be. I'm speaking about, like, life at this point, not just Moon Knight. This is how a relationship should be. You should have people who are already full, well-rounded people and can live on their own and are self-sufficient individuals, but they come together to make a great relationship. Anyway, I'll step off my soapbox now. Okay, next one. Not good. Feminism and powerful women. Not that feminism and powerful women are bad, but the way they're presented on screen can sometimes be bad. Just want to make it clear. I don't have a problem with them. I fully support them, but not necessarily how they're presented on screen. So, I'm not going to talk about this first one a whole lot. I'm going to keep it really brief because I don't remember most of the movie, nor do I care to. It's the Charlie's Angels movie from 2019, ? I don't know anymore. The general message in that was all men are bad, and yeah, I can't stand for that. Not all men are bad. So I didn't like that. If it had been something like, oh no, all men are bad because they're being mind controlled by some evil villain, then sure, that works. But, not all men are just inherently bad for the sake of being bad, or just because they're men. So I didn't like that for, clear reasons. Then another bad example, She-Hulk. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I would just recommend going back and finding that part in the Marvel podcast, because I basically say everything there that I think needs to be said. Now, for a good example, Layla in Moon Knight, so more Moon Knight spoilers potentially incoming. I really like Layla as, a powerful woman in a show and in film and things like that, because she knows her worth and what she deserves, and she stands up for herself. So, like when she's talking to Mark, particularly in the tomb, unfortunately right before Mark is killed, she is demanding the truth. She's like, I deserve to know. And she is like, yeah, I don't care if we have to save the world. I need to know. Our relationship matters. I need to know what you're not telling me. So she stands up for herself. She's also a good fighter, and but she's also a perfect blend of a badass and somebody who is also very gentle and caring and sweet. Like, she combines all of the good qualities. She is a very well-rounded, and she's a very real character. She feels very real. She feels like a person that you could encounter in the world who is a full person and not just a 2D cog in the plot machine, Also, she just has fabulous hair. Yeah. So I really like Layla from Moon Knight as an example of a powerful woman in a show. She was really well written. She seemed like an actual human being, and that's literally all I want of a powerful woman in film, is just to, be a badass and stuff, but feel like a full, well-rounded character. That's literally all I want. Okay. My next good example is from The Umbrella Academy. Kind of spoilers. I'm not really going to talk about anything spoilery in mentioning it. It's just the strong female characters in it are just strong female characters. No extra recognition necessary. There's no all men are bad things. There's none of that crap. It's just they are strong female characters. They do as they do. Some are good, some are bad, but they are full, well-rounded characters who just also happen to be badasses and women, So I like that. Then this next one, I don't actually have any examples for this one. Okay-ish. I have one example, but I'll explain. The next point that I want to talk about is disability and LGBTQ plus representation. So I don't have a example of something doing this badly, though of course there are many examples of movies, shows, etc. doing disability and LGBTQ plus representation badly. I couldn't think of any specific one that I have personally seen, but I just kind of generally noted that the representation is bad when they make the disability, sexuality, or gender identity the character's entire personality. It's good when the disability, sexuality, or gender identity is just a fact of life for the character and is acknowledged and represented fully and faithfully as it impacts them and their life, but they have a life and personality outside of this characteristic. Yes, it will definitely shape their worldview and how they interact with people in the world, but it's not like, my entire personality is gay or something like that, as a character. So, anyway. An example of good LGBTQ plus, A good example of disability and LGBTQ plus representation is from Good Omens. Spoiler alert for seasons 1 and 2. I will be talking about both briefly. According to Neil Gaiman himself, Aziraphale and Crowley are canonically asexual and agender, and it's just a fact of life for them. They both generally present as male. Crowley has occasionally presented as female, but they are canonically asexual and agender. I also like the androgyny of some of the characters, particularly in season 1. For example, Beelzebub is quite androgynous. The angels and demons aren't dressed to look like distinctly male or distinctly female characters, even if the actors, actresses, etc. who play them identify a certain way. On screen they're generally presented as, being relatively androgynous. And then also in season 1 there is Pollution, who uses they, them pronouns, and hang on, I think I was going to make another point about that. In the book, Pollution is represented as he, but in the show, Pollution is they, them. Also, there are different LGBTQ plus relationships shown on screen. The most obvious example being in season 2 with Nina and Maggie, and then Nina's relationship with her partner Lindsay and how that falls apart. But, different relationships are represented. Also in season 2, there's a guy from a magic shop whose partner is pretty androgynous, and has a deeper voice, but, wears a dress and jewelry and makeup and stuff, and, has some aspects that are more masculine and some that are more feminine, and so, there's different representations, and I like how they just assume that these representations are a fact of life, and not like, oh, look how new and different this is, like some shows do. And then, of course, biggest spoiler, Aziraphale and Crowley's relationship revealed to be a romantic relationship in season 2, at least as I understand it to be. I know people would probably argue with me on that, but that is my stance. It's an asexual but romantic relationship. So there's that representation as well. And then there isn't as much disability representation in Good Omens, but there is one beautiful example in season 2 with, oh goodness, I'm really hoping I'm going to pronounce the character's name correctly, Saraquael, one of the angels who is disabled and when in heaven has a flying, like a hovering wheelchair, and then on Earth has a regular wheelchair, and any space that is not readily accessible to wheelchair users, Saraquael will perform a small miracle and make a ramp or something like that so that it is then accessible. So yeah, Good Omens does representation really, really well, and I am quite happy with it. Anyway, next point, speeches. So I'm thinking particularly, characters giving important or epic speeches, etc. My example of a character not giving a good speech, I talked about this in my previous episode, is in Heart of Stone when Rachel gives an men like you speech, and that just pained my soul. But yeah, along with the typical all men are bad speeches, all of that crap. Don't like those. Bad. And then a good example, an example of a good speech, in my opinion, was in Captain America Winter Soldier, when Captain America is giving a speech to all of the people of S.H.I.E.L.D., explaining how S.H.I.E.L.D. has been compromised and what they are planning to do, and, you know, essentially inspiring them to fight back. That was really good. I felt that scene. I really liked it. So, yeah. This next thing is more of just me complaining about stuff. I don't have very specific examples. I'm just going to complain a little bit. I'm going to complain about injuries on screen, alright? So, there's one very popular, if I'm allowed to use that term, there's one very popular injury that likes to show up on screen, which is where somebody has been shot or stabbed in the abdominal region in a place that is not necessarily obvious, and they just hide it and pretend that they're fine until somebody's like, oh my goodness, you're bleeding, and oh my goodness, you've been shot or stabbed and we need to get you help. But like, they insist like, oh no, I'm fine, and just, it's like this one spot that they are consistent, like, characters consistently get injured, and it's generally a non-fatal spot, and they're like, oh no, I've been injured, but I can't let them know because the mission must go on, and things like that. It's become a trope at this point, in my opinion, and it's not a trope I'm a fan of. Next injury-related thing is characters ripping out IVs. Like, no. Just no, please. Don't do it. It's from what I've heard, I haven't actually done this, nor do I ever plan to, but I have been told, and I have heard from people who have attempted to rip out their own IVs, that it freaking hurts. But characters are just like, boop, and pull it out of their arm, and, you know, go on with their day. And usually they do it in a quick and dramatic fashion. I'm like, oh, no, that's bad. So, anyway, I don't like when characters rip out their IVs. Another complaint, it's, again, really random, is characters, like, slicing open the palm of their hands or pricking their fingers in order to get blood. I'm thinking traditionally for a blood pact, a blood-related ritual. Those are kind of the two most common things I can think of. But yeah, they cut open their hands or their fingers, and I'm like, dude, it's your hand. You need your hand for things. I'm like, because there are other parts of your body that you could cut to get blood from. This sounds so horrible. And, like, you have a lot of nerve endings in your hands, because your hands are oftentimes a lot of how you explore the world. But no. These people cut open their hands, fingers, etc., in order to get blood out of them for things, and I'm like, there are better places that you could cut yourself open to get blood out that would be far less injurious and less painful, but, you know, whatever. It's just the traditional dramatic thing to cut open your hand, I guess, and oh, that irritates me. I'm trying to think if characters have ever ripped out stitches. That's also bad. But yeah. Another thing kind of along the same lines of injuries is just excessive gore. Like, I feel like if you're going to have realistic violence on screen, make it realistic. Don't give the characters gallons of blood that they don't have, you know? I mean, honestly, when I think of that, I think particularly of animes where characters will just bleed gallons and gallons and gallons of blood and survive. But anyway, I'm actually going to scroll through... Okay, I didn't mention it anywhere else. So, another injury that bothers me, spoiler alert for the Umbrella Academy, in Season 1, Allison gets her throat slit, and somehow she survives that, even though, you know, there's projectile blood, and, you know, it was her throat, and, like, you know, if you hit, this is, like, actually science, I know, we're bringing science into the podcast, but if you rupture or otherwise injure the thyroid gland, which is, in case you didn't know, in your throat, like, around that same region, it bleeds. It bleeds a lot. It bleeds a lot. So, you know, like, if you have to perform a tracheotomy on someone, something that I hope none of my listeners ever have to do, unless that's your job. But if you ever have to perform a tracheotomy, you want to try really hard not to hit the thyroid gland, which is also part of why I hope I never have to perform a tracheotomy on literally anyone. So yeah. It's just... yeah, Allison getting her throat slit, bleeding a lot, I'm like, it's not feasible that she survived and then was still able to talk afterwards. Like, yes, the show addressed that it took her a while to be able to talk again, but, it bothered me. It didn't seem feasible. But yeah, moving on. My next complaint is leaps in logic. There are some leaps in logic that are reasonable to make. There are some that are not as reasonable. My bad example is coming from Wednesday, so spoilers for that. In the first episode, a character named Rowan tries to kill Wednesday because of a drawing that he found in a book that supposedly depicts Wednesday in front of the burning school and then a pilgrim dude named Joseph Crackstone. There is nothing to indicate that it is Wednesday. It's kind of an intentionally silhouetted / blurred picture. It's hand-drawn. And yes, does the silhouette of the character look like Wednesday? Yes, but I feel like it is a big leap in logic to be like, yes, this looks like Wednesday, well, she must be responsible for destroying the school. Like, that didn't seem reasonable to me. And then my good example, a leap in logic that made sense was, now I'm looking at my example and thinking, how was I going to explain this? I literally just wrote good example equals Death on the Nile, parentheses, the red paint. Like, I brought that up previously with the carmine paint, so, spoilers for that again as I talk about it again. But Death on the Nile, the red paint. Am I talking about my own leap in logic and assuming that it was going to be used for a fake injury? I probably when I wrote that, I was thinking about how Poirot, when he was doing his dramatic reveal at the end, explaining the entire case and stuff, how the red paint came into it, like that wasn't so unreasonable of a leap in logic to use red paint, because I think he noted that somebody mentioned that her red paint was missing, and then it was probably used in the murder, not the murder, in the guy pretending to injure himself, etc. I think that's probably what I meant, but like that was a reasonable leap in logic in my opinion, because it's a thing that I've seen before in various detective shows, movies, books, etc., so I felt like that was fair. My next point is about healthy relationships on screen. My example of a relationship that is not healthy is, I feel like I shouldn't even issue a spoiler alert for this, but The Princess Bride. If you haven't seen it, please go watch it. It is a very good movie, and even though it is a very good movie, it still has its points that I can, disagree with. So, Buttercup and Wesley's relationship is supposed to be the purest, best relationship. You're supposed to be rooting for them all the way through, and like, yeah, I do. But when Buttercup thinks that Wesley hasn't come to rescue her from, her marriage or whatever, she goes to kill herself because she can't live without Wesley. I forgot to mention, trigger warning for suicide. She doesn't actually kill herself. She doesn't actually even hurt herself, because Wesley is like, I'm trying to remember the exact line. I think he said, there's a shortage of perfect breasts in the world. It would be a pity to damage yours. But anyway, even though I adore that movie, it is one of my favorite movies of all time because it is freaking hilarious and a beautifully done parody of the books that, the books that it's parodying, the books that it loves. Even though it is a fantastic movie, I still have complaints at this point because, as I think I said previously, you should be two full separate people who can live without each other, but you come together to make a beautiful relationship. Anyway, that was my complaint with that. An example of a healthy relationship that I think was good. Some people are probably going to laugh at me for saying this, but spoilers for The Umbrella Academy, Five and Dolores. I know some people are going to be laughing at me right now for saying this. Funny enough, I am actually currently dressed as Five because I did a cosplay thing earlier today. So I'm actually sitting here recording my podcast dressed as Five, in case you needed to know that. And I also actually recorded my podcast dressed as Five, the previous one, the one about Heart of Stone. I was also still in costume while recording that. So, anyway, the reason why I say that Five and Dolores' relationship is, reasonably speaking, healthy is that even though Dolores is inanimate, she is essentially Five's version of Wilson, from, that movie with Tom Hanks, the name of which I can't remember. Is it just called Castaway? But anyway, basically Dolores was his person who kept him sane by, pretending she's a full living person and not just a mannequin. Basically, she helped keep him sane while he was alone in the apocalypse, and so he was with her for, 48 years, ? Something along those lines. Basically, he was with her for a long time. And, I'm trying to think, was it 45? I think it's 45. Yeah, I think it's 45 years. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's 45 years. Anyway, it's at least, even if it's not technically a healthy relationship because it's between a person and an object, don't come for me for saying that Dolores is an object, please. She's a mannequin, that's what I mean. Anyway, so their relationship is at least comparatively healthier than other relationships in that show, by sometimes a wide margin. But, it's a healthy-ish relationship in the sense that she helped keep Five reasonably sane, and it's how he copes with the trauma of spending 45 years alone in a post-apocalyptic world. I don't really know where I'm going with this anymore. Also, Five and Dolores is just kind of funny and adorable. I think actually a much better good example of a healthy relationship is Mark/Steven/Jake ? We don't ever see Jake in the show interacting with Layla, but in Moon Knight. So Mark, Steven, and Layla in Moon Knight, that was a healthy relationship. There was some struggle between Mark and Steven because they are two separate alters sharing the same body, and Mark was the one who married Layla, and Steven is falling in love with her, but they end up working it out and, both being in love with Layla, and it was really cute and wholesome, and I liked it. Another problem with modern shows and movies that I see a lot is pacing. So, an example of pacing done badly, in my opinion, is the Loki show from 2021. Even though things were happening in the show, it still felt slow and painful. Even though things were happening, it still felt slow and painful for the first 3 episodes. Things really picked up in episode 4, but considering it was a 6-episode show, it shouldn't have taken the first 3 episodes to start moving things, So I didn't like that for the pacing. A good example of pacing, even if I didn't like the movie as a whole, was Heart of Stone, because it was slightly over 2 hours of film, and it didn't feel like a 2-hour movie because the pace kept things moving. There weren't really any dull moments, even if, I think the overall movie could have been done better. So, pacing. Next thing. Oh boy, have I got things to say with this. Suspension of disbelief. As a viewer of a show, you have to suspend your disbelief somewhat in order to appreciate it. It's harder to appreciate a show if you go, yes, these are actors pretending to feel these emotions and pretending to do these things, So you have to have some suspension of disbelief. There are just some cases where it becomes ridiculously hard to suspend your disbelief anymore. Spoiler alert for Doctor Who, which is a show that I love, but there's an episode that I don't love called Kill the Moon with the 12th Doctor. It didn't science. It didn't science good. Basically, there's a creature living inside the moon, which turns out to be an egg, and it's going to hatch. 12 and his companion Clara get off the moon safely and land on a beach and are looking up at the moon, and the moon explodes. The creature breaks out of its shell that was the moon, and literally nothing happens to the tides. So nothing at all. The tides just keep going, even though the moon kind of didn't exist for a moment there, and that should have a cataclysmic effect on tides and stuff, but it didn't, and that was a problem. And on top of that, the creature that hatched from the egg left an egg exactly the size of the one that it just left in its place, so that the moon wasn't ever fully gone. The whole thing was a scientifically logical disaster. Like, it didn't work. It didn't science. So I didn't like that. Another example of me failing, or at least struggling to suspend my disbelief, is, spoiler alert, from the Umbrella Academy, Allison getting her throat slit again in Umbrella Academy Season 1. I don't know, that that bothered me. A good example is, I talked about that already, so a good example is honestly a lot of movies. There are a lot of movies where I'm able to suspend my disbelief and just really enjoy it, even if the events are really improbable. There's just some things where when they get too close to reality, like with the moon exploding or Allison getting her throat slit, that I'm like, I don't know about that. An example where I could suspend my disbelief for the sake of the movie is the Alice in Wonderland movies. I'm thinking of the ones with, oh goodness. Her name is Mia. Hang on. I kid you not, I'm gonna look her up real quick because I can't remember her name and I feel bad. Let's see. Is this it? No, that's not it. Okay. Oh goodness. Oh goodness. Why am I doing this to myself? Anyway, let's see. There we go. Okay. Australian actress Mia Wasikowska. There we go. Finally found her. I had to remember what her last name started with. Anyway. I really like those movies, and even though they are crazy and ridiculous and not probable movies, I was able to suspend my disbelief for that because the worlds were coherent enough, and like nothing happened in the real world that was so improbable that I'm like, nah, that couldn't happen. All of the really improbable stuff happened in Wonderland, so it was like it was fine. It made sense. I was good with it. So that's an example of being able to suspend my disbelief, but there's a lot of movies where suspension of disbelief works just fine for me. Another complaint that I have with some movies is things happening for the sake of plot. So, spoiler alert for The Mandalorian Season 3, characters had wildly varying power levels in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, and I felt like when their power levels went up or down, it was literally just for the plot to happen the way it was supposed to. There was no explanation for why they were really strong in some scenes and apparently really weak in other scenes. It just didn't make any sense. An example of a thing that happens for the sake of plot but feels justified, and I'm sure some people are going to disagree with me on this, but I have my reasoning. Peter Quill punching Thanos in Infinity War. And the reason why I say that, because this happens for the sake of plot in order for Thanos to break free from the sort of spell that Mantis has him under as they're trying to subdue him. The reason why I say it works is because Quill punching Thanos fits with his character and doesn't just come out of nowhere completely. Like, it would make sense that he is wildly upset that Thanos killed Gamora. So, you know, even if I wasn't thrilled with the character's choice to take that action, it made sense for his character and didn't feel like simply a way to move the plot forward. Next thing I'm going to talk about is villain motives. So, my bad example is, spoiler alert for Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. So, Scarlet Witch kind of ends up being the villain in that one, and oh, that movie. Okay. So, my main issue with it is that her motive just doesn't, her motive can't stand on its own, if that makes sense. It doesn't make sense. Her motive doesn't make sense because her whole thing was she wants to, take care of her boys or whatever, and she needs control of the multiverse, and her reasoning is that, well, what if my boys get sick? I need to be able to take care of them, but it's like it's the problem with it's the multiverse problem. It's the fact that they don't treat the multiverse as being infinite, even though I believe in the Marvel Cinematic Universe it is canonically supposed to be infinite, because if there's infinite worlds where Wanda has children, there's also infinite worlds where she doesn't have children. And if there's infinite worlds where there's all kinds of sicknesses, there's infinite worlds where there's also all of the cures for those sicknesses, It can't stand on its own 2 feet, that motive. So it didn't feel like a reasonable motive to me, and also her transformation to a villain felt really unwarranted. I mean, yes, I understand the Darkhold corrupts you, and so she was corrupted by the Darkhold, But it was just such whiplash after watching WandaVision that it didn't feel earned or warranted necessarily, whereas if we saw her gradual corruption, like let's just say, Doctor Strange and Wanda had to stop some other threat together, and they started out working together, but gradually the Darkhold began to corrupt Wanda more and more until she became the villain, and then there's a sudden reversal, and, Steven thought, oh, this was my friend, and we were fighting the bad guys together, but now she's turned against me because she's been corrupted. That would have been more compelling, but anyway. A good example of a villain motive, spoilers for Black Panther, was Killmonger. I know a lot of people love him as a villain. His heart was in the right place, but he went about things the wrong way. His whole point in taking over Wakanda is that he wanted to distribute the resources that Wakanda has to the people in need who could really benefit from them, and that in itself is a really good motive to want to do something. However, the fact that he went about it in a bad way was what made him a villain in the end. So, a good example of a villain motive. Let's talk about sympathetic villains now. Bad example, in my opinion, is Thanos. Honestly, I said all I wanted to say about Thanos not being a good sympathetic villain back in my first podcast, so I would go back and listen to that again if you wanted to hear that again, because I said it better there than I'll say now trying to repeat that point. A good example of a sympathetic villain, in my opinion, is Baron Zemo, because he wants revenge for the death of his family, because of, the Avengers inadvertently killing his family in Sokovia. For him, it's personal. With Thanos, it was this weird, impersonal thing that it didn't feel grounded to me. With Zemo, it is very clear why he would want revenge. He sees this as being very personal, so even though he's not a good person, you can still sympathize with him because he loved his family so much and wants revenge on the people who failed to save them. That makes sense to me. Basically, he lost his faith in the heroes, that kind of thing. That's a good, in my opinion, if it's done right, I suppose, that's a good villain motive. Now let's talk about redemption arcs. So, let's see. The first example that I have, hear me out, is the Master. My point in this is that Missy has a whole redemption arc with 12. This is Doctor Who, in case you didn't know. Missy has a whole redemption arc with him in the final episode that she's in, and she ultimately dies having helped the Doctor. She was on his side in the end. But then, with the 13th Doctor, they somehow brought the Master back with no explanation to my knowledge, and he's just evil again. And so that was kind of like an anti-redemption arc. Like, Missy went through that redemption arc, and then suddenly all of that progress is just undone with no explanation. I have an issue with that. So that's why I say that it's bad. I would actually say that the redemption arc with Missy was really great. It was really compelling because, she loves chaos and evil and stuff, but at the same time she's come to realize that she genuinely cares about the Doctor and wants to help him. So you see her struggle, over the course of that episode or episodes, trying to choose the right side, trying to, make the right decision. In the end she does, but she dies, sadly, and that was the end of Missy. But I was calling this overall an anti-redemption arc because of the version of the Master with 13, who just kind of came out of nowhere. Another example of a bad redemption arc is Kylo Ren. I know, people hate on the sequel trilogy. I don't love it either. But this was not a proper redemption arc in my eyes, because basically what happened was, in case you haven't seen it, or forgot because you blocked it out of your mind, Kylo Ren essentially hallucinated his dead father Han Solo and decided, I'm gonna be good now, and then just was, or tried to be anyway. That was literally it. It didn't make sense. I didn't like it. Good example of redemption arc. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I said that already about The Princess Bride, but this is also one of my favorites. Maleficent, the movie from 2014. I don't think it got nearly as much recognition as it ought to have, because I thought it was a really good movie. To be fair, I haven't watched it all that recently, but I think it would still hold up even watching it now. So I thought Maleficent had a fantastic redemption arc, because her whole arc was she fell in love with a human, said human betrayed her, and so she learned that eventually she learned through helping take care indirectly of Aurora that not all humans are bad. even though it definitely felt that way after Stefan betrayed her. And she learned to love and be vulnerable again after being hurt, and that's a really great redemption arc. Like, she was a villain because she was in pain, she was hurting, she felt betrayed, all of that. But she learned to be good and do the right things in the end because she learned how to love and, understand that not all humans are bad. And so, it's still one of my favorite movies, and it was really good. Oh boy, here we go. This is going to be an interesting one. Let's talk about killing characters. So, some people might see killing characters as just bad, particularly, I'm not thinking characters in general. They're, you kind of expect the villain, if they're not just going to be defeated, to die. That's usually an expectation, is that the villain either is just straight up defeated or they die. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about semi-protagonists, or like more main characters who aren't necessarily villains in particular. Anyway, killing off characters for good, I should specify, because I know that there are shows where characters die a lot and come back from the dead a lot. Looking at you, Supernatural. But I'm talking about killing characters once and for all. So an example of how not to kill a character, in my opinion, was how Loki died in Avengers Infinity War. So I would say that Loki overall had a very compelling character arc. He started out as the jealous younger brother who just wanted to be good enough, just wanted to be, enough. And like that was compelling. He had especially, his villain arc in the Avengers movie. And then he dies a few times, but he comes back. And by the end of Thor Ragnarok, the movie that chronologically comes directly before Infinity War, though not, it wasn't release order, but it was chronological order. At the end of Ragnarok, Loki and Thor have kind of made up, and it seems like they're in a really good position as siblings now. Like, they genuinely care about each other, and their relationship is in a good spot. Loki has evolved from being the jealous younger brother to being an ally and supporter, and a good supportive brother, basically. He comes back and risks his own life to help out Thor when Hela's trying to destroy Asgard, and Ragnarok is happening, etc. But yeah, so I felt like that was a good character arc, and it took place over several movies, and it took place gradually. It wasn't just a sudden, oh, I'm good now. You see Loki struggle several times with doing the right thing, and so I thought it was good. But we didn't really get to see him in his quote-unquote fully evolved form, his reformed version, the version that cares about Thor and is a good brother and that kind of thing. We didn't get to see him for very long because of freaking Thanos, and I felt like that was wasted. I think it would have been so much better if he died and came back in Endgame. That would have made me really happy. But alas, that's not what they did. Instead, they brought back an Avengers-era 2012 version of him for the Loki show, who was not the reformed version, and I felt like that was a huge waste of a character and of character development. So that's why I just was really mad, because when you have a character who's reformed, you want to see them doing the good things afterwards too, more of them. You want to see how they continue to evolve from there. Do they relapse at all? But no, that never happened because they killed Loki, and I was mad. So yeah. Then a good example of killing off a character, in my opinion, Marvel again, is Iron Man. So the reason why I would say this is good is because it was kind of more or less intentionally. I can't say how intentional it was, but it was kind of set up in, the fact that he was selfish, at least, or started out as being selfish and self-serving and all that was firmly established in the early movies with him. And you gradually see him evolve from there and learn to care about other people and not be so much of a selfish jerk. And I think there's a quote, it's not the, I'm not going to have the exact quote, but I think Captain America says this to him in the first Avengers movie. He says, you're not the kind of guy who would make the sacrifice play. Basically, you wouldn't sacrifice yourself. You value yourself too much to, care so much about others that you would sacrifice yourself for them. But that all came full circle when he did sacrifice himself in the end in order to reverse Thanos' snap. And, Iron Man had a family, and would never have been able to give up trying to save the world in order to be with them, because it kind of became his obsession, I would say, to try to protect everybody, and he wouldn't be able to be a present and loving father with that. He wouldn't be able to give it up fully, even if that was his intention. So I would say it was a fitting end that the one who would never make the sacrifice play made the ultimate sacrifice in the end, and that's how they died. It all came full circle. He had a full character arc that ended with his death, and it was fitting because we got to see selfless Iron Man for a while too. We got to see him go through the different stages of becoming more selfless. It was good. It felt like a proper ending. Was his death sad? Yes, but you know, it was well done, if that makes sense. Sad but well done. We're nearing the end here. Okay, now that I've just talked about good character deaths, I'm going to talk about issues that I have with bringing characters back from the dead. So both my bad examples are just kind of getting at the same point. The first one I have is Supernatural. People just die too many times and come back, not always with an explanation, and you kind of, I feel like you would lose your audience eventually, because it's just like, okay, come on, I can't believe in this character's death, you know, like, they've died so many times that I don't understand either if they decide to if they decide to kill a character entirely, it's harder then to believe that they're actually fully gone and dead. And on top of that, if you don't explain how they came back, then it's just kind of like, how can I trust this then? So I have an issue with that. Same deal with the Flash show, which I never actually watched, but I have heard a lot about. It's just people died and came back. Either this specific person died and came back, or they brought back the character from another timeline, and it was just too much of that happening. It's like, if a character is dead, let them stay dead. Don't keep bringing in all of these alternate universe versions. It just gets really messy. Another one. A good example is bringing characters back from the dead from the Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie, which I was actually kind of surprised by. It was not, you know, by any stretch of the imagination, the best movie ever made, but it was actually better than I expected it to be, and I was, you know, happy about that, because I wanted it to be a good movie, but yeah, I don't know, when I heard they were making it, I'm like, ooh, I don't know that that's gonna be good, but it's actually decent. So anyway, spoiler alert for that. There's a bit where the main character's best friend, also sort of co-parent to his daughter, she dies, but they bring her back, and the reason why it works is because it doesn't happen multiple times, and it's the fact that they can bring somebody back is set up in the movie. It's this MacGuffin that they're trying to get their hands on, that will bring somebody back from the dead, but you can only use it once, and the main character was going to use it to revive his wife / his daughter's biological mother. But once Holga dies, and he realizes that, you know, she is really important to him and stuff, and very important to his daughter, because Holga is essentially the one who is essentially her maternal figure, he decides to bring her back instead. And, you know, I saw it coming. Because it was set up the way it was, I saw her death coming. I was like, she's gonna die, and they're gonna need to bring her back. And so I saw it coming, but it was better than just killing somebody off and being like, oh, they're back, without an explanation, you know? Like, this had an explanation, it was set up, it was paid off, it worked. So that's why I say that was a good example. And now, finally, let's talk about plot twists. So, spoiler alert for Doctor Who, bad example of a plot twist is The Timeless Child. We're not even going to talk about it. If you want to know what it is, look it up. I don't feel like talking about it, but people had a lot of issues with it, understandably, because it was a bad plot twist. Funny enough, I'm going to go back to Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves for this. Bad plot twists. Holga's death was a bad plot twist, because it was really obvious that she was going to die. Okay, maybe that was just me, but I'm like, at least the fact that somebody was going to die and that they were going to use the MacGuffin to save this person rather than bring back the mom, that was really obvious. So when Holga died, I was like, I saw that coming, and I know she's going to be brought back, so I didn't consider it a good plot twist because it didn't feel all that twisty to me, if that makes sense. And then the final plot twist I'm going to talk about is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, book by Agatha Christie. Unsure if there are any film adaptations or anything of this, but it would be really interesting to watch it. I'm going to talk about the absolutely massive, colossal spoiler that takes place at the end of this book, like that's revealed at the end of the book. So, if you have not read the book, I would highly, 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 highly recommend stopping the podcast and reading the book and then finishing it, even though there's probably only going to be a minute or two left on this after I talk about it. But because it's such a good book, it has, in my opinion, one of the best murder mystery twists in the history of murder mystery twists. Please go read it, and then come back and listen to it. So consider yourself fully warned of spoilers. So, the big spoiler then. The big spoiler is that the narrator is the murderer. And it was really well done because, funny enough, before reading the book, I had been thinking to myself about writing a story where the narrator is the murderer. Then I read this and went, oh, it's been done, and Agatha Christie did a great job. I guess we can all go home now. It was really, really, really well done. Because when you read it the first time around, you don't suspect it's very rare that you would suspect the narrator of being the murderer in the first place. But reading it the first time, you're like, yeah, no, this makes sense. And then you get to the end and you go, wait, what? And then on the second read, you're like, oh, I see all the things. And even though the big spoiler is revealed the first time around when you read it, it still has, in my opinion anyway, considerable reread value. And yeah, I love it so much. And I would love to see a very cleverly done play or film or show that follows this story, because you would have to be very clever with how you film it, because in a book, it's much easier to omit information. On film, you have to be more creative, at least in my opinion. So, I think it would make for an incredible play or movie if the people managed to, do it correctly. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say on that. Oh my goodness, this podcast episode is over an hour. This is the longest one I've made in a while, I think. I really hope that you enjoyed my rant about everything that I think is wrong. Well, not everything, but a lot of things that I think are wrong with shows, movies, etc. these days. There's obviously many other things that we could discuss. These are just the ones that came to mind when I was scripting this episode. And yeah, I think that if people sort of correct these issues moving forward, we'll be in a much better spot in terms of entertainment and stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Take care, and I'm sending you all the love.